Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, A Conversation with Death. The man who rules the world and the angel of darkness take on a horde of demons in this inaugural John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, A Conversation with Death for 99 cents on Kindle or in paperback today. When Toys R Us went out of business this year, it had a ripple effect on the entire toy industry. And we're starting to feel the impact of those ripples on the toy industry with Mattel's recent announcement that they were going to lay off 2,200 of Mattel's workers and sell several of their factories. However, the problems that went on at Mattel went on before Toys R Us went out of business, and many of those problems have to do with the mismanagement of several of their toy lines. Now, I've been a guy who's collected action figures for over 25 years. And as I got into collecting action figures, one of the lines I was collecting on the regular was the DC Universe Classics toy line. And later on, around 2010, 2011, is when we started to see mismanagement of the DC Universe toy line by then executive Scott Nicklick and many of the people at Mattel, who decided they wanted to create toys featuring characters from lines of long ago, like the Super Friends and Super Powers, that were over 30 years old and many customers just did not recognize, or they wanted to do obscure characters from modern lines like the Rainbow Lantern Wave, which was called Wave 17 to many toy collectors, that was universally ignored by many toy collectors who were angry at the fact that we had to deal with these rainbow lanterns instead of getting many fan-demanded characters. And this had a ripple effect on the whole DC Universe Classics line, which was already struggling in sales after the Trigon wave, which literally struggled to get an audience. And after about wave 20, we started to see the end of the DC Universe Classics line. Now, the DC Universe Classics line's problems were exacerbated by Dan Didio's decision to end the DC Universe and launch the New 52 Universe. And Mattel decided they wanted to launch New 52 toys to go along with the New 52 Universe. Unfortunately, many of those New 52 toys did poorly at retail because many comic fans were angry over the end of the DC Universe, and they did not want to buy any sort of DC merchandise. And this has been a pattern that has gone on for almost 8 to 9 years as related to DC Universe properties, because DC Universe properties have struggled at retail for at least 8 to 9 years now, and many comic fans who used to buy entire cases in order to get a full wave plus a collect and connect figure stopped buying figures altogether. And those who wanted to get classic characters who came out now and again, they would cherry pick waves of figures just to get the characters they want. Now, Mattel did offer a subscription service to collectors, and when I had some money, I did buy a subscription to their service. However, customer service problems with Digital River alienated a lot of people, and when they offered the second year, many of those people who were alienated by Digital River didn't want to subscribe for a second year, and a lot of them even got angrier when they saw more of those rainbow lanterns coming in instead of classic characters people wanted to see, like Speedy, like the Changeling, and like many other characters who people wanted to see complete a team, because many people who bought DC Universe Classics, they wanted to see teams completed. They wanted to have a complete Justice League. They wanted to have a complete new Teen Titans, because I know many people who wanted to have a complete new Teen Titans and were angry that they never got a Changeling, they never got a Starfire that was wearing her classic Perez costume, or that they got a Speedy or other characters who were affiliated with the new Teen Titans. A lot of people were angry about that, and they were also angry about the Rocket Red figure, who was made to appear like Jeff Johns' idea for Rocket Red and not the classic Rocket Red. And that's what led to a lot of people not buying the second year of the subscription for the DC line. And DC was one of the lines that they mismanaged. And another line that Mattel mismanaged as related to their online thing was the whole Voltron thing. Because with the whole Voltron Classics thing, yes, it sold, but the overall toy was a misproportioned piece of junk in comparison to other Voltrons like Soul of Chigokin or Toynami's Masterpiece Voltron, or even some of Playmate's Voltron toys. Yes, you could put the figures in the lines, but Mattel's execution of concept does not give you a toy that can even stand up or even hold any of the accessories. So Mattel's problems on the boys' side have been apparent with many of their action figure lines like DC Universe Classics, and they've mismanaged the DC license on the boys' side very, very much. They just have not done a good job with their figures, and their recent figures that they announced at the San Diego Comic-Con, they continue to mismanage this brand, because recently they did a teaser where they announced a 1990s wave which featured a Kyle Rayner Green Lantern, a Jim Balent Catwoman, Batman Beyond, an Impulse, a Kingdom Come Superman, and it looked like they were going to offer an entire classic wave. And from what I saw on many boards for toy collecting, people were getting excited about that wave. They were getting ready to start ordering full cases. There were people making declarations that once they saw this wave, they wanted to go out here and buy a case. However, Mattel decided to change that lineup for the multiverse wave that was planned to be all 90s by removing Impulse and Jim Balent Catwoman, two characters people wanted to buy, and replace them with modern characters from DC Rebirth. And with the announcement that they were going to make DC Rebirth figures, what happened was, instead of people being excited enough to buy those entire cases that they used to buy of Mattel action figures, what happened was people decided to talk about cherry picking. And cherry picking is bad for a toy company as related to action figures. When people cherry pick, what happens is you have characters who become what they call, in the toy collecting world, peg warmers. And a peg warmer is a character that either the kids don't want and collectors don't want. And over the last 8 to 9 years, Mattel's Multiverse line has been filled with peg warmers, which are figures that just don't sell, but they just sit there on the shelf. And this is one of the things that led to problems at places like Toys R Us, because these peg warmers, what they do is they prevent managers from ordering new stock. And because they can't order new stock, what happens is the stuff sits on the shelf, it rots on the shelf, and customers, they keep seeing these toys, and then they stop wanting to come to toy stores like Toys R Us. And that happened because of the combined mismanagement of the original DC Universe Classics line, the continued mismanagement of the DC license, and Dan Didio's decision, and the former, I forget what her name is, Diane Nelson's decision to launch the new 52 DC Universe, which did extreme damage to the DC brand as related to merchandising. Now, the second thing that led to Mattel's troubles was their complete mismanagement of the Monster High line. Now, the Monster High line from 2009 to about 2015 was Mattel's best-selling doll line. Many people were out here collecting Monster High, many kids were collecting Monster High, many adults were collecting Monster High, and in the goth subculture, Monster High was one of the storied brands of the goth subculture. And the line was doing fairly well until Mattel mismanagement did the Freaky Fusion story, which was one of the poorest selling lines in Monster High, and it led to the jump the shark moment of the Monster High line, because before they did the Freaky Fusion line, Monster High was selling like hotcakes, and it was literally becoming Mattel's iconic brand. However, with the Freaky Fusion mismanagement plus the loss of Disney's Princess line to Hasbro, we had Mattel executives freaking out. And when those Mattel executives freaked out, they decided to overcompensate by changing the Monster High line and rebooting it. And this unnecessary reboot, what it did was it alienated a whole host of toy collectors. I've heard many goths say they want nothing to do with Monster High reboot dolls, and I've heard many kids say they wanted nothing to do with Monster High reboot dolls. And Monster High reboot dolls have not sold very well because the concept is poor. The cartoon that is behind the Monster High reboot line is dumbed down to the point of a Sesame Street level, and many of the toys themselves have uninspired designs and uninspired face paint. And all of this alienated many of those collectors who I remember going to the Times Square Toys R Us who were out here looking for Monster High dolls and eagerly anticipating new releases of Monster High dolls. Now, as from what I see, the Monster High doll line could have gone on for another 10 to 15 years on reissues alone, because Hasbro ran Batman figures for over 10 years just on reissues of Batman the Animated Series action figures. And Mattel did the same thing when they got the license for the Batman line and the DC Comics line. They literally made reissues of Batman animated figures, Justice League figures, and they made millions of dollars on just reissues alone. And Mattel's doll division, they mismanaged things because they just didn't understand that people would continue to buy Draculaura's, Claudine Wolf's, Ghoulia Yelps, Laguna Blues, the core 4 characters, and Cleo Denial, the core 5 characters of Monster High. And they would continue to buy them because these are the core 5 characters in the cartoon, these are the core 5 characters in the story, and all you have to do is just change the packaging and people would continue to buy them. And even some of the other characters like Toralei and Claude Wolf, and this was money in the bank. Unfortunately, when it came down to Mattel's executives, they were so scared of losing money with the Disney Princess line that they didn't see the high value that the Monster High line had, and in their efforts to overcompensate, what they did was go out here and change their Monster High line with this disastrous reboot. And many toy collectors are just keep telling Mattel, we want classic Monster High back, we want classic Monster High cartoons back, we want classic Monster High concepts back. And classic Monster High is something that sold extremely well. Again, it sold 2-to-1. Barbie outsold Barbie 2-to-1 for several years because Barbie's sales actually declined when Monster High was at the height of its popularity. But Mattel did not see the direction things were going in. I got inspiration from Monster High to create the E-Steam series, which is Monster High All Grown Up, the John Haynes series, which is again part of that whole Monster High All Grown Up concept, and even characters like Spinsterella come from the whole Monster High concept. That's where I got a lot of influence and inspiration from Monster High, and I saw a vision where, again, this line could have gone on for 10 to 15 years on reissues alone, and it could have also gone on if they were a little bit more inspired in their character choices. I mean, if I could come up with characters like E-Steam and Delilah, well, really Delilah, who was actually inspired by Toralei, and Claudius Johnson, who was inspired by Claude Wolf, then Mattel could have easily come up with concepts that would be just as appealing to people. And if I could come up with a concept like Spinsterella based on things I saw in Monster High, they could also come up with concepts that could be just as appealing to people. It's all about vision, and Mattel really didn't have much vision for many of their toy lines. They had gotten comfortable, they started coasting, and they really don't have, again, a grand vision for many of their toy lines, and that's why many of their toy lines continue to struggle today. Now, another toy line that continues to struggle for Mattel, in addition to DC Universe Classics, and which is now DC Multiverse and Monster High, is the DC Superhero Girls line. Now, the DC Superhero Girls line, it does marginally okay, but it does not perform as strongly as it should. And one of the reasons why DC Superhero Girls did not perform strong out of the gate was due to the fact that, again, they changed many of the costumes of these characters. They went to try to do a Monster High meets DC superhero concept, and it just never really took off. And the reason why it didn't take off again is because they dumbed things down like the new Monster High cartoon, and they did not really give us really compelling stories like the original digital Monster High cartoons were, nor did they give us dolls that were really interesting or really gave us something similar to many of the classic costumes that many the heroines wore. And because they didn't look similar to their classic costumes, a lot of collectors, again, stayed away, and a lot of kids stayed away because they're used to their characters looking a certain way, and they didn't have that brand recognition based on the way they presented these characters in the DC Superhero Girls line. Because every time I go to a toy store like Toys R Us or Target, those toys shelf warm like no tomorrow. And another line that Mattel had problems with as related to their toys is their iconic Barbie line. Now, Barbie has been in trouble for several years. Again, at the peak of Monster High's popularity, Barbie sales took a huge dip, and many people just saw the Barbie concept as archaic. And things got worse for Mattel as related to Barbie because, yes, Mattel's sales of Barbie went up because people stopped buying Monster High. However, what happened to Barbie is Barbie went full SJW over the last couple of years, especially the last 2 years, where they've introduced all these new body types. And what has happened is many of the heavier body types and the shorter body types and the so-called diversity bodies, that stuff shelf warms like no tomorrow. Because I've gone to Targets, I've gone to Toys R Us's, and I've gone to numerous stores, and I'll see many of these SJW Barbies with the side of the head shaved, the multicolor hair, or these different ethnicities or these different heavy body types, and these dolls will just be shelf warming like no tomorrow. Now, Mattel thought that they would be able to please many of the social justice warriors by going out here and promoting these diversity Barbies. Unfortunately, many of those social justice warriors who complain about Barbie giving people body issues did not want to put their money where their mouth was as related to Barbie. And as a result, stores like Toys R Us wound up sitting on shelves of merchandise that just didn't move. And another line that they had problems with was the WWE license. Now, the WWE license is the most profitable license for Mattel right now. And on the boys' side, the action figures continue to sell like hotcakes. And those action figures they've had no problem moving over the last 9 to 10 years that Mattel has had the license, because collectors have gone out and bought these figures on the regular, and they've reissued many of these wrestlers 4 and 5 times over. So they've made money on the licenses for the wrestling side as the action figure line with no problems. However, they decided to do a Superstars line of dolls for girls, and those toys have shelf warm. Again, this is all part of the identity politics, where they're trying to give girls boys concepts. Unfortunately, it hasn't sold. And when I look at Mattel overall, their problems are related to their mismanagement of their brands, and it's their mismanagement of their brands that led to Toys R Us going partially out of business, because part of it had to do with Bain Capital and their leverage buyout. Another part had to do with toy companies like Mattel and Hasbro, because Mattel, on their side, they mismanaged several licenses that could have been profitable for years, and Hasbro just went crazy with Star Wars. And with Hasbro, it was their decision to make all these toys for these SJW Star Wars lines. That was also part of the reason that led to Toys R Us going out of business, because I also went into Toys R Us many times and I would just see these Star Wars toys just sitting there for Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and you would think that if you see these Force Awakens toys from 2014, 2015 not selling, you would think Hasbro would dial things back. However, Hasbro didn't dial things back. In fact, they continued to increase making toys for characters like your Rays or your Rose Chicos or your Jyn Ersos. And again, I have seen these toys in Toys R Us's, Target's, Walgreens. They're just sitting there because most people who collect figures are primarily men. And when it comes down to men, they usually don't really buy that many female characters unless they're completists. And if there are lead characters, like for the latest Star Wars, like with Rogue One or The Force Awakens, outside of the collectors buying these characters to complete, many casual buyers, especially boys, have no incentive to go out here and buy these characters, because when it comes down to boys, they buy characters who they identify and relate with, and they're not seeing that at the toy store. When it comes down to the toy section, a lot of boys, they're again not seeing figures that look like them, so they have no reason to go out and buy them. They'll go out and buy wrestlers because wrestlers are guys like them, and they'll buy some superheroes that look like them or have struggles like them. But when it comes down to many of these other toys, they have problems with them. And Mattel just didn't understand its customer. It didn't understand its customer bases. And it mismanaged many of its toy lines. I mean, it even mismanaged its own Masters of the Universe Classics line, a line that was selling like hotcakes with toy collectors. And it decided to sell the license to Super 7 instead of trying to deal with the management issues, because there was a big collector base, and in fact that base rallied behind this toy line to go out here and support it. However, what happened was that many of those toy collectors, again, they did that from Masters of the Universe, they went now going over to Super 7, and that's all because Mattel did not have an online retail site to go out and service those customers effectively. Now, when it comes down to Mattel, again, they are 1/3 part of the problem as related to what happened to Toys R Us going out of business. The other third was Hasbro and its just complete mismanagement of the Star Wars line and the complete mismanagement of the new Disney Princess license that they got. And it was also a third related to Bain Capital and Bain Capital's complete mismanagement of Toys R Us, where they were literally, they went out here, bought this toy company on a leverage buyout, and that leverage buyout turned out to be a complete disaster because they were looking for a buyer, but no one is going to buy a company filled with debt. And now we have this ripple effect in the toy industry, which has been soft for several years because as kids of today are growing up, they're growing up in a world of games, apps, and things related to iPads and smart devices, and they're not really playing with toys because their parents just don't give them toys to play with anymore. I mean, outside of a kid I saw playing with some Black Panther figures, I really don't see that many kids playing with toys anymore. And again, that also has to do with the mismanagement of these toy companies who just don't know how to manage brands. Because I used to see kids playing with Monster High dolls in 2010, 2011. But again, no one wants to buy these toys because of these mismanaged decisions. And when it comes down to many of the doll lines, many people have complained about Mattel just putting poor quality clothes on these dolls and the poor quality construction. And even some of the collectors who play action figures complain about quality control issues as well, because Mattel has cheaped out, and because Mattel cheaped out, this has led to why Mattel has been in decline. But Mattel being forced to lay off these workers and cut 22% of its workforce, a lot of this has to do with mismanagement in Mattel, poor leadership in Mattel, and Mattel taking several customer bases for granted. Again, I saw for myself that there was a lot they could have done with the Monster High line that could have kept that line going on for another 10 years, introduction of different characters, and continuing to reissue existing classic characters. And I also saw the DC Universe line, how it could have gone on for another 10, 15 years if they had not done this New 52 relaunch and they just launched classic characters. There were possibilities for those lines. Unfortunately, Mattel's executives just don't have the vision to go out here and set a course for the company to keep it competitive. And because they didn't keep it competitive, what happened is they flooded the market with a whole bunch of toys no customers or collectors wanted. The customers and collectors walked away, and now the toy industry is feeling the impact of that on their business. At this point, there may be a possibility of salvaging Mattel's business. However, what they're going to have to do is start listening to the customer and giving the customer what they want, and stop trying to go out here and give people what they want, and stop listening to demographics of people like SJWs who don't buy product. What they're going to have to do, again, is go back and change many of their lines. Unfortunately, I don't see them doing enough in that direction. I see them making steps, but they're going to have to make some power moves to really get people excited about their products again. If you'd like to try some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the Temptation of John Haynes, the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. And if you want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.